I think the British economy is more fragile than most people realise. We have had a spurt of growth over the last year or two, but I don't think it's going to continue at anything like the 2–2.5%, which is the kind of consensus view. There are a number of reasons for this. I think our rate of investment is far too low and needs to be much higher, and the fact it's so low is the major reason why productivity isn't going up. I think our industrial base has shriveled to a point where we just can't pay our way in the world, or from a trading point of view, and this is made worse if you look at the overall balance of payments position, because our net income from abroad has gone way, way down, is now in negative territory, and we're paying more and more abroad in transfers. So the total balance of payments is getting bigger, the deficit is getting bigger and bigger, and I think that's going to weigh the economy down. And I think that the consequence of all these deficits is that debt's going up and up, which is really unsustainable, and that much of what we have seen actually in the way of increase in consumer confidence has come from asset inflation, which can't go on. So I think there are a lot of headwinds there which are going to slow us up. And that's before you start looking at some of the major problems that may afflict not just us, but the whole of the Western world, particularly if the Eurozone breaks up, or we have a banking crisis, or if the austerity policies which people are putting into effect just don't work, just plunge the economies into recession, or if we find the political scene fracturing more and more, so that we get more and more countries electing governments which really are so much in disagreement with each other, or the parties making them up are so much in disagreement with each other, they can't really implement rational policies at all. And I think there are a lot of dangers from all these areas which may well materialise over the next few years if we're not careful. I think the policies being pursued by the British government at the moment on the economic front are really likely to be ineffective and not to work. In particular, I think the idea that what you can do to get the government deficit down, which is important, can be achieved by cutting expenditure and increasing taxation, as they're proposing at the moment, are much more likely to plunge the economy into a recession than they are to get the deficit down. I think the deficit is mainly driven not by excess government expenditure. I think the real problem is that the deficit is a reflection of the huge balance of payments deficit that we've got. And if you don't get rid of one, you won't get rid of the other. I think the root problem is that the whole of the West has allowed itself to become unbelievably uncompetitive with the East over a huge spectrum of manufacturing and trade. And as a result, what's happened is that there's been enormous balance of payments deficits in the West, which have generated all the requirement for the debt, which is now beginning to swamp us. And that the only really fundamental way of getting these disjunctions sorted out is to have a really major currency realignment. I mean, I think the real problem with the West is that the cost of producing more or less everything in the West is just too high, because we're charging out our labor and all the other costs incurred domestically to the rest of the world at too high a level. And this is essentially an exchange rate problem. What's happened in the West is that we've allowed our exchange rate to get stronger and stronger, roughly doubling up between the 1970s and the 2000s, whereas in the East they've done the reverse. And this is why these enormous disparities in the cost of producing all kinds of products between the East and the West, why the West has such huge balance of payments problems, and why it's stagnating. And this is, I think, fundamentally what needs to change.